Hello and welcome to the University of Leeds. My name's Simon Moore. Today I'm joined by our new Professor of Poetry, Simon Armitage. Thanks very much for joining me in this lovely space we're in here. Today we're having a bit of a chat. We're doing a bit of a preview ahead of a public lecture, public talk by Simon Armitage. It's happening here on campus in the Workshop Theatre. It's part of the School of English, and it's part of a festival that's going on this weekend in Leeds and Bradford called Words in the City. So some of you out there might be coming along. There's, as you can see, about 40 or 50 seats behind us. It is fully booked, so I'm afraid if you haven't got a ticket for that, then this will have to do. We're going to give you a bit of a preview of what Simon's going to be talking about later on. If you're watching live, we'd love to hear from you, so do comment below, say where you're watching from. Let us know if you've got any connection to the university, and of course if you've got any questions or requests of our poet here, Simon Armitage.
Mainly questions.
Mainly questions, he's not after requests. If you've got anything you want to say to Simon in particular, then pop them in there below and we'll read some of those out. I should say my name's Simon Moore as well, so just to add to the confusion, make sure you tell us who your question's for if you can. Thanks very much for watching, and do share the video as well. So, Simon, can you tell us a bit? You've recently been appointed as the Professor of Poetry, but your history at the university goes back a little bit further than that, doesn't it? Can you tell us about your connection with the University of Leeds?
Yeah, I had my first ever university teaching job here. It was about 20 years ago, and I was teaching creative writing to undergraduates, some of whom I'm still in touch with, actually, but it was my first taste, really, of a university English department of any kind, because I've never studied English formally beyond A-level. I'm pretty much homemade, slash making it up as I go along. So in some ways, it was really nice to come back, and you know, it's a very similar environment. There's still this lovely Victorian street in the middle of the rest of the university that's really grown up around it. But I've also had a long connection here with the library, with the Brotherton Library and the special collections there. They keep all my archive, all my manuscript papers, things that were going mouldy at the back of a cupboard for a long time.
That's good of them, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's odd. I bring them in sort of wheelbarrows and skips, and the next time I look at them, they're all neatly filed and laminated and so on and so forth. So yeah, again, it's a nice coming together and making the most of connections that have been growing over the best part of 2 decades, really.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, it's great to have that archive here, as you mentioned. So do you visit regularly to drop things off to add to it?
About every 3 or 4 years, I give them a little top up, arrive in a big van. Yeah, I'm pretty haphazard with my manuscripts and my writing. I've started using notebooks over the last 4 or 5 years, but before that it was just whatever came to hand. And before that, when I was working as a probation officer in Manchester, a lot of my early attempts at certain poems were written on the back of court reports, social inquiry reports, home office stationery, things like that.
Yeah. Well, so for those not familiar, I believe there's a lot of school kids around the country that study your work. Simon Armitage is a world-renowned poet. And I believe, is it in special collections then that are hosting the archive?
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, there are manuscript drafts in the archive of poems which have ended up on the GCSE and A-level syllabus. So if you were determined enough, you could come along here and go and have a look at the sort of first very crude scratchings and scribblings that made up some of the poems that you're now having to sweat over for your exams, for which I apologise.
Well, hopefully they're enjoying it. It's probably that time of year, actually, isn't it? May. And so you a few years ago received an honorary doctorate from the university. You can watch that online actually on our YouTube channel. What was it like to receive an honorary doctorate?
Well, I had to wear some pretty remarkable clothes on the day, you know, hat and cape, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a great honour and you know, a great privilege. I mean, you know, as a writer, you want people to engage with your work, and poetry, in comparison with a lot of art forms, is a fairly small operation. So to you know, find some visibility for the work and to be honoured by people who you respect and from an institution that you respect as well, it's, you know, very, very, very flattering. So it was really nice actually that day to come back and meet some of the staff that I'd worked with all those years ago.
Yeah.
A bit nerve-wracking to stand up there and give a speech, sort of stewing away under that big cap with Melvin Bragg sat to one side.
Yeah.
But also a really nice occasion as well, in as much as I got to speak to some of the students who were graduating that day, and also their parents. The parents were the people who laughed at my jokes.
They're on your wavelength.
They're my age.
Yeah. Thank you for everyone who's been commenting in. So Baba says hi from Pakistan. It's lovely to hear we're reaching a global audience. And we've also got Sharon, who is watching whilst waiting to take off from Heathrow. So I hope we're keeping you entertained whilst you wait there. Do say hello if you're watching, if you've got any questions for Simon Armitage. As I mentioned, if you are just joining us, we're here. This weekend is Words in the City. The University of Leeds is a principal partner for Words in the City, and that's a sort of relative of the Ilkley Literature Festival, again, which the university is a supporter of. That festival that claims to be the oldest and biggest literature festival in the UK. That happens in September. Ilkley is literally overrun with famous authors, writers, poets, and there's lots of different interesting events there. So if you're around Leeds or Bradford this weekend, do check out Words in the City, or you can look for that Ilkley Literature Festival in September. So you mentioned sort of that connection with students, and now you're back. You're back in not a full-time teaching role, but it's actually a new post, isn't it, Professor of Poetry? So what's it like to be back kind of working with students again?
Well, I've never really left academia. As I said, I started here 20-some years ago. That was just a part-time position, and then I've taught at universities in Manchester, Sheffield, Iowa, and a number of other places in the States. So I've always had some relationship with an academic institution. It's something that I try and do on what they call a fractional basis, because I've got my writing to get on with, so it works both ways. But one thing that's really important for me is that the students really keep you on your toes. You know, they are different generations, they've got different gods and goddesses, different reference points, they're reading other people, they're writing different kinds of work. One huge revolution that's taken place during my lifetime is the internet, and it's changed everything, and that includes poetry and its transmission. So as much as anything, I'm learning things from them about how to switch my phone on and so on and so forth. Yeah, I see. So they're kind of keeping you down with the kids and relevant, I guess. I'm not sure about down with the kids and relevant, but they certainly keep you informed. And I've always thought of teaching as a dialogue. I think that the days when any teacher, be it at a school or university, stands up and dispenses wisdom and knowledge are pretty much over. It's a conversation, and that feels very healthy and very enjoyable.
Yeah. So for anyone watching who is thinking about studying, we've got 2 open days coming up. There's also in the School of English, there's a brand new BA in English Literature with Creative Writing. You can come and work with Simon Armitage. It's quite a nice thing that we're able to say there. Are you going to have much involvement with that course in particular, do you think?
Yeah, as you say, it's a course which is just starting, so there'll be a new intake this autumn, and yeah, I'm looking forward to working with people who will be organising and teaching that course and meeting the students. I also run an extracurricular sort of out-of-hours reading group called the School of Night, which sounds very clandestine and secretive, but essentially we meet once a fortnight and just sit around discussing poems, usually on a particular subject. So the last one we did, the subject was food and drink, and we brought a little bit of picnic along as well as appropriate accompaniment. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there's nothing really that I like better than to sit there just looking deeply into a poem. Sometimes we'll spend a whole hour and a half talking about a semicolon. Usually we get through 3 or 4 poems, but they are open to anybody at the university, not just English or creative writing students. And again, that broadens the discussion if somebody comes along and they're taking, I don't know, a BA in astrophysics, probably not. Do you know what I mean? It's it's a variety of experience. Always enriches the discussion. Yeah,
that's fantastic. So yeah, do check that out if you're a student. Do you have staff come along, or are you trying to limit it to? Do you limit it to students?
No, staff are very welcome to come along. To begin with, I wanted to encourage students, just because I wanted them to feel comfortable and to talk and to offer their own opinions without thinking it might be somebody in the room who knew a lot more and so on and so forth. Yeah. But they're very friendly encounters. So I think as it evolves, it will very much be both a staff and a student group. The staff will bring better wine as well, presumably.
Yeah, you'd hope so. Well, you might see some of my colleagues along to that then after that invitation. Speaking of which, a colleague of mine, I believe, Prue, asks, how much does living in Yorkshire inspire your work?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, there were times in the past when I was described as a northern poet or a Yorkshire poet, and that used to rile me a little bit, you know, as if it was some kind of subdivision of poetry itself. But actually, if it's been used as a description of the work, then I completely understand that. I write a lot about the landscape, I write a lot about the people. I've chosen effectively to stay here, and the longer I've stayed here, the more interested I am in both the reality and the fantasy that is Yorkshire. So it suits me very well, and the attitude of Yorkshire, whatever that is, suits me, and the outlook, and it's definitely ingrained in the work.
Yeah, fantastic. So thank you for that one, and we've got another hello from Naoki, who says hello from Japan.
Hi there.
Hello. Thank you very much for watching. Anyone else who wants to say hello, do pop it in there. Just a little heads up as well. In about 5 or 10 minutes' time, Simon's kindly going to perform and read out one of his poems. He hasn't told me which yet, but I'm sure it's going to be fantastic. So we'll close off today with a reading there. Is it one that you're performing later on this evening at tonight's event?
I think it will be, actually. I mean, since I started teaching here, which is almost an academic year ago now, I've given several readings. I've probably read more times in Leeds over this past 8 months than I've done in the previous 30 years.
We're getting our money's worth, aren't we?
Yeah. But the good thing about that has been that it's made me think about reading different poems. I often fall back on poems that I feel work pretty well in a performed environment. But tonight, for reasons that I haven't quite explained to myself, I'm only going to be reading animal poems, and so this is a little sampler for that.
Cool. So if anyone's coming along later, there you go, a bit of a sneak preview. It's going to be animal themed tonight.
Yeah, but that's not an invitation to come along dressed in animal costumes. I don't want sort of alligators or an ostrich sitting in the audience, or animal noises. I don't want those.
Don't want to be heckled.
No, well, not by bird calls and barking or anything.
So leave your onesies at home. Please dress respectfully. I don't know, what's the usual dress code for
tuxedo? Yeah. Tuxedo,
apparently.
Blue tuxedo. Yeah.
You'll know if you see them that they were watching anyway. As I say, if anyone's got any other questions, do pop them in below. So, I guess for those students and potentially others, what would you say to people that are thinking about a career in poetry like yourself?
Well, I'm not sure career is the sort of right word, really. It's something that develops. I would say write the poems. That's what needs to happen first. I've been fortunate in as much as I can make a living and have a career doing the thing that I really want to do. But I think part of that's come down to being prepared to do things that are slightly outside poetry, or take poetry outside just its printed form. I've always thought of poetry as having much more potential than just existing in book form. But what I would say is that I feel as if I've found an incredible amount of independence and freedom through it, freedom of expression, a sort of an independence of living, and I would say that for those reasons alone, it's something worth pursuing.
Yeah, and do you find that? I guess my own naivety. For example, Words in the City this weekend is poetry and spoken word. So what's the kind of difference there?
Well, this is the stuff of argument and
late night debate
and lecture, late night heated debates. What I would say is that over the last 10-15 years, those two worlds, which were quite distinct worlds to a certain extent, have been moving closer. And I think the term poetry, which was once sort of possessed and owned by a literati and by a published group of people, and perhaps by an academic group of people, that's been broadened. I think the ownership of that term has been broadened and widened and spread amongst a group of people who've got different versions of what poetry is, and that's been a good thing. And I think spoken word has enriched page poetry, for want of a better word, and page poetry in turn has enriched spoken word. So it's everybody's had to up their game, I think, especially for readings and events.
Yeah.
What was the question? I can't remember what the question was.
What's the difference, I guess, between poetry and spoken word?
Yeah. Well, I guess it's to do with where that performance happens. The performance of most poetry that I come into contact with takes place on a white surface and performs through black marks in silence. Yeah. Whereas the other kind of poetry tends to walk out onto a stage and look for a reaction there and then.
So you kind of span it then if you're obviously producing lots of poetry, but you enjoy the performance element of it.
Yes, I am amphibious between the two worlds.
Have you always been?
I think when I started, because of some of the criticism I was reading and the people who were teaching me at the time, some night class and things like that, I had a fairly purist view of what poetry was. I didn't really think it had anything to do with the poet. I just thought it had to do its stuff on the page without anybody there to explain or entertain. I've changed my mind about that now. I think the poet needs to be the whole package, whatever that package is, whether it's a quiet personality who just wants to write their books and not be seen, or whether and they develop some kind of personality around that, or whether you want to go out there with a megaphone, shouting and bawling and spinning plates and trick cycling and sword swallowing and eating fire.
Is that what we can expect tonight?
Yeah, all of that, while dressed in a giraffe costume.
Fantastic, and making animal noises. Excellent.
I'm making promises I can't keep.
Well, it's excellent. Thanks very much for chatting to me. In a minute or two, we're going to ask Simon to close off this live stream with a short performance. Don't know if it's short actually. It could be 10 minutes long. He's going to finish off with a performance. As you can see, we're here just ahead of his public talk this evening, which I hope we've given you a bit of a flavour of today. Just a final question before we move on to that, and I should mention you'll be holding up your new book nicely as you read that. So do you want to tell us briefly about your new book, Flipped?
Yeah, this is a book I've written in collaboration with Yorkshire Sculpture Park, who are another local organisation, institution that I've worked a lot with over the years. It was their 40th anniversary last year, so they commissioned me a fairly open brief. I thought I'd write a couple of poems, and I've ended up writing 40 and taking photographs that accompany the poems. And it imagines the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, YSP, as a sort of Middle Europe sort of enclave, medieval European country. I think there's a bit of sort of Brexit going on for me in this book, but it imagines it as a little sort of country in its own right, which I visit during this residency and write poems about.
Brilliant. Well, that sounds
It's
great.
called Flipped.
Excellent. So yeah, you can see that in a second while he reads out his poem. The final thing I did want to ask you is, what would you say to people who are thinking about coming to Leeds specifically to look into to study poetry or English and writing? Why is it a good place to come to?
It's, this is what the students tell me. It is a great place to be a student. What I particularly like about the university, and I've only experienced this from the teaching point of view, is that it feels both campus and city. You seem to get the best of both worlds here. When you're in the university, when you cross over that road, you feel as if you're in a very distinct learning environment, a campus environment, but you are literally a stone's throw from the city centre and all the great things that Leeds nightlife brings.
Yeah.
And of course, it's a university with a reputation for teaching and research excellence. I sound like an advert for the university now, but I genuinely mean all those things, and that's one of the reasons why it's so satisfying to be working here. In a city which is just on my doorstep as well. And
not to mention the nature and wilderness that's around, not far from Leeds as well. Yeah, that's right. I've always felt comfortable in cities where you can look between the buildings and see the moors and the hills, and this is one of those cities. You can also see the top of the Parkinson building from the top of the hill in the village where I grew up. So it was pretty much an obligation. Really. You've had it in your sights for a while. Yeah, this is as far as I've got so far. It's kind of my Jerusalem. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for chatting to me. Thank you to everyone who's commented and asked questions and said hello. Do share the stream. We'll get this to even more people. And as I said, there's the Words in the City this weekend, Ilkley Literature Festival in September. And if you are interested in coming to view the campus just on the edge of the city of Leeds, we have got upcoming open days on the 15th and 16th of June. So do check those out, come and say hello and see what life at the university is all about. So thank you very much, everyone, for watching. Thank you, Simon, for chatting to me, and good luck for tonight's interesting and entertaining performance. We'll see what that becomes. And yeah, take it away. I'll leave you to it. Thank you.
I forgot my glasses actually, so I might have to make this up as I go. The depths. I asked the lone angler what species of fish he was hoping to cook. Common roach with its scarlet trim, silver blue armour and bloodshot eyes. The stately carp in its golden body stocking, wearing its emperor's moustache. The fidgety dace, the miserable chub, the wingless parrot of the fancy perch. Or maybe the nuclear sub of the pike, nosing through slimy reeds, its undershot smile housing a rack of talons for teeth. But he kept a poacher's silence, statuesque on the grass bank, his shadow a tall, thin keyhole in the river's skin. So the plastic float nodded and bobbed in his head, and the line sank through his throat, chest, stomach, groin, into the Ganges, Congo, Loire, Orinoco, Blue Nile.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.